Hi, so in this little clip, I want to share a little bit of information with you about a part of the frontal lobes that is sometimes called the working memory. And the working memory is really important for us to understand because it is, if you like, the place where we do our thinking. And possibly one of the better ways of thinking about the working memory is to imagine that it's something of a limited size. And obviously it's part of the frontal lobes, it's part of the prefrontal cortex. So obviously it's not a place, but it is a space within that part of the brain, within that brain region that is, and the important thing here is, limited in size. So the prefrontal cortex's job, of course, as we know, is to do all of our rational work, our thinking work, and all of that wonderful stuff. And the zone, if you like, that it will use in order to do that, the platform that it needs to put stuff on in order to think about it, is called the working memory. Now, just to put it out there, it is sometimes disputed as to whether we should be thinking about it in this way, but from my point of view, it feels really helpful to be able to imagine that there is a part of the brain where we kind of hold our attention and then put the things that we want to think about so we can make decisions, that kind of thing. And therefore, from that point of view, it's just a useful way of thinking about it, whilst it may not be epically accurate. In the grand scheme of things, what we're looking to do here is understand its function and some of the limitations. So it's the space where we need to put things in order for the brain to be able to consciously think about them. And the thing that I really do want to draw your attention to is the limited size, because this is relevant. Now, I don't know whether there's a massive difference in terms of the individual sizes that we might find for working memories in individuals, but I think they're all, broadly speaking, the same sort of size. And here's the idea. If you want to think about something inside your head, you're putting the something you want to think about onto the working memory so that you can give it your consideration. And there it is. Now, when we just got one thing on the working memory, that's fine. You know, there's lots of room for it to move around. There's plenty of space, if you like, for it to be manipulated. So if you like, the brain can kind of look at it from various different angles. It can give it its time and its focus. Let's face it. How often do we just have one thing at a time that we need to think about? Probably not that often at all. What is more likely to be happening is that we're actually needing to think about quite a lot of things all at the same time. But what you can begin to notice almost instantly is that there's less room. So if, for example, we were doing one of the brain's most difficult jobs, prioritizing or deciding, there's not as much space. The more of these we put on here, the less easy it is to see them very well. The prefrontal cortex and the working memory will be starting to experience feeling a little bit overloaded or overwhelmed. And that's because it doesn't really have the space in the room it needs to be able to kind of look at, assess, consider each of these great big files of information that represents a decision that needs to be made, a choice that needs to be made, whether that's prioritizing what order it should do something in, or it's actually making a decision about what its best steps would be, what next step it should take. It needs to be able to put all of the relevant files onto the working memory and have enough room to work with them so that it can actually choose, no, not that one, not that one, not that one, this one. So that's the first thing we need to be mindful of when it comes to thinking about the working memory, is it's of limited size and therefore it can only cope with a certain amount of files or stuff that it needs to be keeping its eye on all at once. Now, this does vary from person to person, but the average number of different things that a working memory can really quite well cope with and make sure it's giving a decent amount of consideration and attention to is about 4. Beyond that, and again, it will vary from person to person, what we start to experience is not a certain number, but lots. The brain starts experiencing this, the working memory starts experiencing this as lots. lots and lots and lots, and oh my goodness, as you can see, stuff starts falling off, stuff starts going a little bit wrong. And that is exactly what actually happens. We start forgetting about things. They fall off the working memory. They're no longer in our awareness. They're somewhere else. They're still floating around. We don't have very quick, easy access to them. They've kind of fallen off the working memory. So they're less easy to access. They're being forgotten about. They're getting muddled up. And overall, this is creating a sense of pressure, of strain. And the brain is not great with pressure and strain. The prefrontal cortex isn't great with pressure and strain, because pressure and strain mean, oh my goodness, I might not be okay here. And that is going to start to impact on its ability to be its best self. So what's the answer here? Well, the answer here is, from a working memory perspective, and in an ideal world, this is what it would prefer. First thing in the morning or last thing at night, depending on when you're freshest, it makes its list of priorities. It decides what order it needs to do things, or it makes its choices for the day. Once those are made, it essentially likes best to work through what it's got on, one thing at a time. Even if it's just moving that thing one step further forward, then that can come off and this can go on, and so on and so on. Worth noting that every time it swaps what it's got on here, that costs energy. So we want to make sure we're not doing the swapping too often, and we certainly don't want things like these getting in the way, distractions, things that aren't actually relevant but they're taking up space. We also need to be mindful of the fact that every now and then emotional load comes along and it kind of plonks itself on the working memory to the exclusion of all else. It literally pushes all other of the content out of the way. There's just no room for anything other than emotional content. So this perhaps would help explain why you might find it very, very difficult to actually sit down and think about things when you've got a lot on your mind. There's a couple of different reasons, but one of them is that literally that load has taken up all of the available space and everything else has fallen off. So I hope that kind of makes sense of your experiences. One more thing that I wanted to share with you just before I head off, because I know a lot of people experience this and think, oh my goodness, what is going on? But you ever been in a situation where you walked into a room and it was absolutely certain what you were going in there for? Clear as day, off you went and you arrived in that room, only to find when you got there, you couldn't remember what you were doing there. Ever happened to you? Here's what happened. When you got up and decided you needed to move, you put the action into the working memory. And off you went with the action in the working memory. But the chances are that somewhere en route, other stuff managed to get in the way. It might have been distractions, it might have been other thoughts, it might have been other pressures, it might have been other things entirely. But at some point, the original thought that you had about why you wanted to be in the room fell off the working memory. And that is why, when you get in there, you can't access it. Not in that moment. You will remember it later because it's still there. But in that moment, you might be racking your brain, as you would say. What you're actually doing is racking the working memory to try and find that thing that you went in there for. But it's been knocked off by some of the other content that's going on inside your head, and it's fallen off, and therefore in that moment isn't accessible, even though a couple of moments later, when you go and sit back down again, it's probably going to magically reappear. It hadn't gone far, but far enough you couldn't access it right there and then. That is kind of how the working memory works.